Hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of All Things Labor Law. I've missed all you guys from all my students that still continue to actively engage me on Facebook. I haven't shot a video in the last 2 years actually. I've been hit with lots of personal issues and also had family tragedy in my life. So I was going through crazy for almost 2 years. But I'm here. I'm still passionate about this thing called labor law. And as you know, the purpose of the channel is for me to be able to bring you the freshest content in relation to labor law. And um, and I just decided from now on, I'm just going to do things a little bit different. I am actually going to change my approach completely from the way I used to do things. I've decided to just make things completely simple for those who understand. I've recognized that says there is so many people out there that still don't understand the basics, and that is the way I'm gonna be able to do things now. So then there's basically three pieces of legislation that came out. Um, but I just want to reflect a little bit of of the dynamic market of labor law and labor relations, because there's so much things that has happened over in this time, from the violent strikes that you saw taking place all over the country. Recently, the public service, where the hospitals were striking, even though, as you know, they were not supposed to be striking because they were essential services. But that's just the nature of our labor market and climate, is that there's complete distrust between employers and employees, and people resort to desperate measures because the normal way of doing things just doesn't work. It just falls on deaf ears, and people have to stand up for their rights and be able to take this drastic action in terms of industrial action and protests, commonly known as strikes. So yeah, let me just go back to some of the things that I've picked up in the media, and there's basically three of them. It's in relation to COIDA, Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act. There's a plethora of things that has changed there. I'm gonna go through a little bit. I'm gonna go through some of them a little bit later. And then also there's sectoral determination 7 in relation to domestic workers, where there's massive developments happening there. In future, I'm going to talk about sectoral determinations. I'm going to talk about employment equity. I'm going to talk about, yeah, I have so much planned. So just keep staying excited, and so that I can be able to share you that content. Um, in the 12 years that I'm in the labor space, I have seen the legislation just, evolve over time, with how things has drastically changed. Um, and Again, it happened at this time around with this three pieces of legislation were standing on the president's desk for this bills to be signed, and it took him, I think, also another couple of years, but now it's finally ratified. It's passed through Parliament. It's law now. Um, and So the first one was the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, which I'm going to expand on, like I said. And then there was SD7, domestic workers. And then the third one was the Employment Equity Act. There's some little bit of, pardon me, there was a little bit of changes happening there as well. In relation to, I'm gonna talk about sectoral determination 7. What the change there in is effectively is that for the first time now, there was talks about in the media along, but now it's actually into law. Domestic workers now can actually claim from the compensation fund for injuries they sustain at work. And to take it a little bit further, in the event that there is a death in the on the employer's premises, and as a result of the work that the person was doing, it, by extension, their family members can also put a claim on behalf of the person that's deceased. Much like what happens in companies, exactly the same thing. But it's just now, it's been extended now to domestic worker, which I think is a great leap forward. I can remember in the past, the domestic workers couldn't apply for UIF. They didn't have much rights, and that's also another example of how the law has changed over time. They can now claim for UIF, and by extension, now they can even claim for injuries sustained in the workplace, and that was exclusively for private sector and companies, and now it's extended to them as well. So that's quite exciting. And then with regards to the Employment Equity Act, what happened there was for the first time now the Minister of the Department of Labor, was now known as the Department of Employment and Labor, has extended now his powers for companies to actually implement employment equity targets. That's also something I'm going to cover in the future. I'm going to extensively explain employment equity. What is employment equity targets? What are DG reviews? And there's so much other things that we can cover in the employment. If you want to get a brief overview of the Employment Equity Act, I've done a segment on employment equity uh, when I was active in the past. I think also about 2 years ago. Uh, just go back and just have a look at that video. It will give you some context, a little bit of brief basics in terms of um, what Employment Equity Act is in a nutshell about. So I'll just put a link up at the end of the video for you to be able to see that as well. And just by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe and to share this videos and this content for everybody to see, because I think it's very important for the average person to know what the rights people are suffering out there. And this is it's actually something that I'm selling that nobody knows they need. So, but you're going to learn and grow with me. So people have been asking me for a while now, when is the new videos coming out? And I just couldn't answer. It broke my heart that I couldn't be able to make videos, but now I'm back and full steam ahead with it. So then now I'm just going to go through some of the major change in the COIDA legislation, and basically I think I wrote down here seven pieces of legislation that was included and acted within the NS. I think is all of them are very important to note. Um, so now the first thing there was they expanded the definition of the word worker, and I see this right through even in the basic conditions of employment act. Remember when I started off the reason in the beginning when I started off the channel, I started off with the National Minimum Wage Act because that was a massive piece of legislation that came into effect, and people were talking about it and people didn't quite understanding. And I think that is the premise of the channel actually, because that was actually my very first video that I made about the National Minimum Wage Act. And in there it identified the expanded definitions of employee because of the word employee. It was in the Labor Relations Act they will talk about an employee, uh, and it filtered through and cross-referenced over to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. But now it has been changed in 2019 with the National Minimum Wage Act. The definition of employee has been broadened to include the word worker. In fact, I think employee is no longer in there, if I'm not mistaken, but they use the word worker so that people can be included within their rights, so that they can have access to the legislation. And I can see now in the COIDA Act, it also expanded the definition to the word worker, and as I mentioned, it's across all um, the other labor legislations. And then further on, the COIDA stands for Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases. So which means that the disease part is also very important. People just have the assumption that COIDA is there for your injuries, but if you sustain a disease, like I remember there was a case that I was familiar with, and uh, these workers come to me and say, look, there's asbestos on the premises, and we inhaling these things, and people just got systemic sicknesses over time with inhaling this. There was no respiratory mask and all, and then some of the employees in the past has died, and people discovered. But this is the reason why people were dying, is because there were those type of chemicals in other sectors where there was fumes and no respiratory masks. So that's the issue of the diseases. But now, um, post-traumatic stress disorder is also part, or if you sustain that illness or disease as the result of your working environment, that can also now is open for people to put a claim on that subject, of course, where you've the necessary documentation and due diligence must be completed in terms of all the documents, doctors' reports, and so on. But in future, we will deal with the compensation fund and the legislation um, that goes with that, and we will be able to talk about that extensively. And furthermore, another thing that was included there was a no fault rule that has been that came into effect, because I think that was also one of the barriers, where there was a practice where if it was your fault, then there was going to be no relief for you, and you were not going to be able to claim. But there's no there, there's a, the law has been expressly stating, the clauses has been put in where it doesn't matter whose fault it is, you will still be able to have a claim. There was a case of Eskom where this employee was he sustained a massive injury on his leg, and it turns out that he did not follow all the safety precautions, because all the safety material was available and he didn't actually use it. So basically, on that basis, he was actually dismissed from the employee. But now, on this a piece of legislation that is now included in the COIDA Act, is the fact that there is a no fault um, basis clause where you are still having access to be able to get that relief from the compensation fund. And then the next one, which I found also very interesting, was the fact that the courts has now placed. I mean, the law allows for the courts to actually place caps on attorneys to stop charging exorbitant fees to putting these claims through, and the Department of Labor has identified that as a problem, and people sit with pennies, and the attorneys are getting all the money. That is now completely also changed. I think that was very important for that piece of for that clause to be included in there. And I think it's going to be on the labor court to be able to just make sure that is into place, that actually takes place, where people don't get overcharged for these services that the attorneys do. I think there was a similar problem in the road accident fund as well, where the attorney was just blindly robbing people um, in terms of claims there as well. I think also another important aspect was the labor inspectors are also going to get more powers. And remember, their powers are enshrined from the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. There's also another topic that I want to speak about. My mind is all over the place on content that I want to be able to bring to you guys. I want to actually just explain the difference between a labor inspector and a CCMA commissioner, and what informs their powers and what they're able to do. That's something that's going to be covered by me as well. So I'm going to be able to just explain and just simplify it. And also, one of the important things I want to do is complex legislation and law jargon. I'm just going to convert it into the most simplistic way for you to understand, and then just expand your knowledge from it, because you don't really, if things are complicated, you don't have an appetite to be able to want to learn. But if things become simple and things start being easy to understand, then you'll have a curiosity to learn. And that's basically also one of um, the reasons why I started this channel as well, is for you to be able to whet your appetite, to be able to be curious, to be able to learn. And when you have the knowledge, you will be able to just use it because people just get on this must there out there just for unnecessary things. But anyway, I digress. I'm going off a tangent. Sometimes that is also going to happen. But yeah, so yeah, the labor inspectors are going to have also powers for them to be able to just enforce. I can just also remember that in my walk with this previously, labor inspectors couldn't just give out an compliance order. What happened in the past is they they used to issue employees with a chance to execute a written undertaking where the employer commits to say, yes, I will comply and I will pay this person the money. Maybe this person didn't receive their salary, as an example, for the last 3 months in the, not the commissioner, the inspector goes to the employee and enforces the BCA on them. So then what happened was in the past where um, they were just had to go the written undertaking route. But now the BCA also has changed. It says that the labor inspector can actually use discretion whether it's going to allow this employee to use a written undertaking or just hit himself with a compliance order. And it has come a long way. Labor inspectors don't even have to go via the labor court. They actually have access now to the CCMA where a normal arbitration can take place. It just circumvents so many other things. It just cuts out so much red tape where a compliance order can be turned into a arbitration award. So yeah, those are massive developments also, which we're also going to be speaking about. So that also just ties into this where the labor inspector has more power in the compensation fund um, legislation called COIDA. And then yeah, just the next thing that they say here that there's stiffer penalties um, for non-compliance on employers. I remember with Employment Equity Act in back in 2014 where there was massive amendments where the company the Department of Labor imposes a 2% penalty on your annual turnover. There was no longer just 100,000 rand fine or which I mean that was short change for massive companies. And but now they just made it more stricter where the company can actually lose some of the profits and just pay it over to the Department of Labor for not complying to the Employment Equity Act and not having employment equity targets in place and just diversifying your workplace where there's sufficiently represented across all the races of the country. So I think that was also important. So yeah, those are the type of things that I want to discuss with you, and I'm just looking forward to creating more content for you.